Thanks very much. I'm often asked why we spend time at these sorts of events with folks like you, and it comes down to one simple thing, that what we find is very consistent globally with AWS is that the conferences are structured to teach and to share and to educate. And what we're going to seek to do today is share some of our story and how we're working with some leading agencies in Australia and New Zealand, and then spend some time deep diving on how we can use some very simple Amazon services to achieve risk mitigation through public sector. And in the spirit of sharing, we'll get started. So as far as TechnologyOne's concerned, just a little bit about our history. We're a 30-year-old organisation who's listed on the ASX. And a lot of organisations in Canberra in particular, trust us to run their services and software behind the firewall. Increasingly, though, over the past 2 years, there's been a very deliberate push and very high degrees of momentum as those agencies who have trusted us for 10 or 20 years behind the firewall now trust us to take that forward and provide some sort of software as a service in the new language and deliver that from the public cloud. And that's what we're doing. Underpinning those things, though, is we heard this morning this concept of compliance, or think in real actionable terms, risk mitigation. And there's a bunch of things on the screen you can see there. One thing we think is very important, though, is that to not make public cloud and software as a service a little bit better, but to make it far superior to what we could afford and even contemplate on premises and behind the firewall. In fact, a lot of the organisations in Canberra I speak with have still today significant budget constraints around, I can't afford the protection, so I choose not to accept that service. Little things like encrypting, that's pretty taken care of, and most agencies have a very good footprint on that. But when it comes down to scanning and metadata and understanding and inspecting content, a lot of agencies still struggle with the budget required to provide those services at scale. And we've got a role to play in that. And so what we've done is we sat down with a few leading agencies, which I'll come to, and we're trying to understand all the moving parts. And so I'll start with this theme of, certainly from our perspective, we see the public cloud as being a component of services. There's lots and lots of things to choose from. And if you look too closely, it can be wildly complicated. But what we seek to do is to take what we call primitive services from AWS and assemble them in ways that help you mitigate risk and deliver services to your end customers through whatever model you choose to go to market. So where do we start? Well, we actually started working with two organisations who share a lot in common. One of the things we look for are patterns. And as much as we might argue that these agencies in different jurisdictions are different, from a SaaS perspective, all we see is what's in common. And the risk mitigation process is pretty much the same, even though there might be different go-to-market strategies from each of these different organisations. And so we sat down with the Treasury a few years ago in Canberra, and we really asked the question, what do your customers expect? Because the ISM isn't an instruction manual, it's a conversation to start this process of mitigating risk together. And as a SaaS provider, we can't make that your problem. That's unacceptable. And so what we had to do was spend a lot of time with Treasury in Australia and Treasury in New Zealand, understanding what was common from our perspective and how we deliver that to you. Now, coming out of that was a wave of support. We had a lot of customers in the WA Shared Services Group move to the platform. We've got a lot of shared service organisations like CAA in Queensland using the platform. And now increasingly here in Canberra, we have a range of portfolio agencies and departments who have adopted the cloud at scale. And you'll see some of those customers on the screen behind me. What's fascinating, though, to give you a tale of two cities, and kudos to everyone in the room, we're seeing public sector agencies move faster to the cloud than some of the commercial organisations we deal with. And that's very exciting, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us. And so as we unpack these different complicated problems and how we're trying to simplify it, look, at the end, we end up with a bit of a magnitude 7 type scenario where there's a rich platform now which is based upon AWS, where we take care of everything. Now, this makes sense to most commercial organisations. I'll come back to this and really hone into its relevance around shared services and around public sector and government in particular. We've got a fundamental belief in the company, though, and we're hearing it loud and clear from all of you and all from our customers that digital delivery matters. It matters to the citizens, it matters to our elected representatives, it matters to the government in general. And so what we're very proud of is the fact that we really believe that the cloud is not just about a cost efficiency, risk mitigation argument. Those things are important. What it's about, though, is providing digital access to your services, and be it your staff working from home in a more flexible arrangement, or delivering services to residents to interact with government in better ways. And we've got one simple philosophy inside the company, and that is if we can harness the power of the browser, it'll simplify the way in which your constituents and your customers can access the cloud and the cloud services. And so that's a bit about our story and what we're bringing to public sector. If we now restack the diagram I showed before, though, and talk just about shared service delivery and how all these roles come together, we end up with something like this. We end up with a set of very, very strong primitives and infrastructure services from AWS. And they're well known of that, right? And I want to start this language with you today about Amazon take care of security of the cloud. And that's their responsibility. They do it well. We're really not interested in what type of computers they're buying. It's really nonsense for us to try and understand that. And why do we care? On top of that, though, what we bring then is this framework, this software as a service piece for agencies where we then take responsibility for security in the cloud. And so we start to see a very discrete set of responsibilities form, and we like to use this language of assigning responsibility. And of course, when it comes to shared services and delivery of benefit to customers and value and digital disruption, all this sort of language we're using today, it then comes into, well, if those two things are accepted, that AWS should be trusted about security of the cloud, and that we can take responsibility of security in the cloud and delivering our software as a service, it makes sense, and the agency and the portfolio should then focus on what is the best possible configuration that personalises the experience for the customer, but doesn't cause custom software development to be triggered. And it's this really careful balance we've been working with Treasury over the last 2 years to develop. And so what effective we have now is we've abstracted the configuration of that shared service group to be really personalised for those customers. But it doesn't mean there's custom software. So you get the benefits of public cloud adoption with the hand-in-glove benefits of software as a service, but you don't need to worry about we're the only tenant. You don't need to worry about what we're going to happen and if we need to change our mind and if our requirements change. Today, as I stand, we run the same software in New Zealand, in Australia, and in the United Kingdom for all of our public sector customers. And because by pushing the configuration up to where you all earn your stripes and where you know best, it allows you to influence that policy, implement that policy, and really delight your customers by taking charge of that consistent experience, be it reports, GL codes, or some really, really more, boring information like how agencies should run payroll in similar ways. But those things matter around efficiency. The end result, though, is that we get the transform cloud to be the consumption of services. And we start to move the conversation around VM shift and DR to digital enablement, power the browser, but there's an absolute role to play for shared service agencies. Because without you, we cannot connect with those customers in the way you can. And that's where you can earn your stripes. And let's be clear, we don't know that industry as well as you do. And I'd like to say that you probably don't know infrastructure as well as Amazon does. And somewhere in the middle, we know how to run our software at scale. And I think that sort of sense of partnership is really what excites us, and what we've seen is accelerate adoption of the cloud. But here's the thing. What we want to do in the spirit of Public Sector Summit is you give something back. I mean, that's interesting, and there's some opportunities, and you can see how this thing comes together. But what we want to do now is pull apart one particular part of the ISM. We want to give you foundation starting points, because as much as this sounds exciting, it doesn't cover every app in your ecosystem. You'll have legacy apps which we don't provide a service for, and perhaps that no vendor today provides services for, and you must lift and shift that to the cloud. But the point here is that that's a small part of what we take care of in delivering our software as a service to shared service agencies and their end customers. And it's very detailed. But in the end, there are 4 services from AWS we use, and it's a completely serverless architecture. And why this is important for you, and I'll come back to what I said at the start, and that is that, we don't imagine that TechnologyOne will solve every single problem you have in your business. You've got far wider landscapes than we provide services for. And so every single thing you do should be based around these very primitive ideas that can make life easier for you, because you don't need 20 people reviewing log files. You don't need a whole squadron of people worrying about the integrity of data as it's moving through the network. These services take care of that, and they really simplify your IT landscape. And so it's a little bit about what we do and take care of on your behalf, but it's also, I think, in some way a call to action, because having shared this, we all should adopt this. It's good for all of us. The one thing, though, and I'm embarrassed to say that I am at one with the Australian ISM, and I'm also at one with the New Zealand ISM. I'm not proud of either of those two things, but this was one example of how we can construct services and take care of a single principle as described by government. For those that are at one with these standards, I think there's around 943 controls just for unclassified data. We're not going to put you through how we deal with all those things, but simply it's about starting a conversation that these are things we can take care of. You can then use that data to assess your own risk, and then you can choose to proceed or not. And so what we come back to is just to reinforce that, if AWS is taking care of that security profile of the cloud, if we can provide services you can depend upon and maintain security and privacy in the cloud, and then we allow this separation between configuration and software to let agencies at a shared service level really deliver compelling value to their smaller agents who just can't afford some of the hardware behind the firewall, I think we're driving in the right direction. And we really see this future state of making sure that those services delivered, and we call that software as a service, delivered from the public cloud. So patterns help simplify the complex. We really believe that stepping back and looking at things from a global perspective lets us do more with less. And we don't have hundreds of people to support this. We have a small team, which allows us to focus really well. In the truest sense of the word, we do rely upon AWS, as we all do at these sorts of events, and they really have taken care of the heavy lifting, as we talked about. Full simple services, 100% serverless, and it takes care of a key principle no matter where you operate from a public sector point of view. And I think one of the things just to leave you thinking about, and there's a stream of sessions that really go into deep or business or technical understanding of these concepts, just have a think about rethinking and changing your thinking around the public cloud is all about deny everything from day one, and you make a business decision to allow something to happen. And that's a very, very different paradigm from an unrestricted network, and you're having to try and work out and invent and create ways to defend the network. It's just flip that thinking. There is so much taken care of. Your decision is to open the port. You don't need to think about what to close, because it's explicitly denied, and that's really important. It's a conscious decision. Now, what's a good conference without a call to action? And all I'll simply leave you with is this. If you've considered those 4 services, which are 100% serverless, and they solve a real problem for you operating in government around log data and something really trivial but is important on a measurement point of view, then we've provided that to you. But have a think about this. And as a hand back to our awesome room host, have a think about what you're going to build on Monday. And that's really what we're here for. So thank you.